All right, everyone, let's do this. I'm Drew McManus, the author of Adaptistration, and this is my podcast, Shop Talk, where I invite captivating guests to talk about engaging topics connected to the orchestra business. Our first guest is Dr. Brea M. Heidelberg. She is an arts management educator, consultant, and researcher focusing on the intersection of arts and other fields of study. She is an associate professor and the director of the Entertainment and Arts Management program at Drexel University. Dr. Heidelberg is a contributor to the recently published Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Performing Arts Workforce, along with the Diversity Resistance in Organizations, Volume 2. Her current research interests involve the professionalization of the field of arts management, the training and development of arts managers, and management issues unique to small and mid-sized nonprofit arts organizations. Dr. Heidelberg's consulting work focuses on human resource issues in the nonprofit arts, particularly issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. She enjoys graphic novels, office supplies, and beach days with her son, Beau. Hello, Brea.
Hi.
Yes, we definitely are going to circle back to the graphic novels and office supplies, which in a pinch, the first can serve as the latter. But
Yes.
First, let's say hello to Ruby. Hello, Ruby Lopez Harper.
Hello.
Mexican mother, wife, dancer, photographer, poet, and social justice warrior, Ruby Lopez Harper is the Senior Director of Local Arts Advancement for Americans for the Arts. Her portfolio includes leading field education efforts centered in equitable practice, leadership development, local arts advancement, disaster preparedness and emergency response, and community building for the arts agency field, arts and culture administrators, and arts marketers. She is the chief architect of the National Arts Marketing Project Conference, and she leads AFTA's Arts and Culture Leaders of Color Network and the leadership forum that produces affinity-based leadership development programs. She's a mentor for the Arts Administrators of Color Network, and Ruby's work has focused on equitable access, grant making, supporting individual artists, community development, economic development, cultural tourism, marketing, disaster preparedness and emergency response, and public art. Is there anything left for anyone to do? You seem to have covered it all.
Yes. That's why when people come, I'm like, I know a little bit enough about everything to be dangerous.
It's pretty much arts administration in a nutshell.
Yes.
You don't have to be a jack of all trades, but it certainly helps to be a jack of all trades and do everything at once simultaneously. But we're within all of that, we heard lots of words I think we're going to be talking about today, and the topic is centering equity. Now, for the bulk of the viewers of this podcast, or the listeners of the podcast actually, are going to be from the orchestra and opera admin worlds. And the phrase centering equity isn't something that, let's say, gets injected into everyday conversation. So, Ruby, can you set this up for us?
Yeah. So, one, equity isn't a new thing. The civil rights movement has been long underway. There has been incredible amounts of work paving the way and working at creating a just society that everyone has what they need. Everyone is given resource, or everyone, I shouldn't say given, everyone has the resources they need to thrive and do well and succeed. And, I think centering equity in this moment, I've been really lucky. Brea and I have been friends and colleagues for a number of years. And, we've both experienced inequity and oppression within the arts and culture field, in the different organizations and in the different, environments that we've moved in. And I think in this moment, we've spent a lot of time, so we talk really regular and, often have some really interesting reflections, I think, which is one of the reasons why this conversation for us resonates so much, is that, we share the intersectionality of being women and mothers, but, as our own race, as our own identity, there are different things that happen and different ways that we're experiencing different moments, and the interactions that we then have with the environments that we move in that are predominantly white. This moment in particular, centering equity, I think for me has really exposed, if you will, the importance of action. And so we've been talking a little bit about that. Brea, I don't know if you want to, jump in and share a little bit about your insight too on this matter, the way that it's been kind of presenting for you.
Yeah. So the idea of centering equity right now seems brand new to a lot of people. Those are sometimes difficult conversations to be part of, because I'm looking over at somebody that's like a newborn and waking up to this issue, and I'm just like, where have you been? My God.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I remember calling Brea and I was like, I don't know, everybody's woke switch is on. Like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, so I guess you're here now. Welcome. Please have a seat at the table. As we explore some of these conversations, it's interesting to see how centering equity works differently for people when they think of themselves as creatives and operating in creative organizations. So my background is also in dance. I started off as a dancer and transitioned into arts management pretty much at the end of my undergrad career. So as a dancer, I experienced like inequity and what it means whenever your body shape doesn't look like everyone else's, or my permanently stained sink and bathtub as I brewed coffee to dye my tights because skin tone didn't mean skin tone for me. And it's those experiences that also informed how I knew how to operate, act, and react as an arts administrator, operating in spaces where maybe I didn't have to dye my tights, but perhaps it was a conversation about my hair or vernacular, or just being forceful and forthright, which is a common personality trait for administrators in the arts, but reads differently in this body, in this lived experience. So, I'm happy that people are starting to have some of these conversations around equity. I'm happy funders are providing funds for this. I do have concerns about like a year from now, 2 years from now, when maybe the funders have moved on. Hopefully not, but maybe they might have, and will organizations still be willing to do the work when it's not the shiny funding mandate that it currently is?
I love that you bring that up when we're thinking about, because centering equity isn't in this moment, also isn't about this moment, and I think you follow the money. A lot of folks, want to see the receipts for the work that people claim is important to them. You talk a little bit, you mentioned kind of the microaggression of in the workplace. I think, to kind of go from hyper tiny to, really big macro, it starts in the day to day. It starts in the work environment. It starts in the sensitivity and the competency around understanding, just even accepting different lived experiences that are just further complicated by all of the intersectionality. And, you're right, when funders don't think this is bright, shiny new right now, and they've moved on to the next, impact indicator, organizations are really going to have to pause and think about where this work is showing up and where they are making monetary investments and where are they putting their money where their mouth is, because this isn't work that should just be funded. This is work that should be fundamental, and we really should be embracing and embodying and operationalizing. We're not in a place anymore where this shit can be a checkbox. Like, it has to be DNA.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you for you. Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, no,
I was just gonna say, like,
I'm like, just trying to jump in.
I am grateful that the funders have sort of started this, though, because what I've come across both in my working life and my consulting life are a lot of I'll use the term well-meaning assume that there's douchebag air quotes around it, but a lot of well-meaning
I'm so stealing that.
yeah, a lot of like well-meaning individuals who are like, okay, so I know that our organization isn't equitable. It might be because some disgruntled people of color who have been hurt in the past have told us so, but I'm on board with that now. Okay, I understand that. But where do we start? And the fear of where to start and the fear, the fear of not knowing where to start and the fear of making a misstep is often paralyzing for these people. So having funders say, let me give you some money to help you figure this out, has at least been a starting place for a lot of organizations who have not done the work to date. So that's something.
Well, Ruby, you hit on a point that really stuck with me, which is you mentioned the word checkbox, and checkbox activism is kind of a pet peeve of mine to begin with, and especially with funders, because yes, funders they put the money into the good things that need to be done, but funders also have a lot of checkbox, kind of just it's just baked into their DNA to a degree too. My concern with efforts like what we're discussing right now is orchestras, operas in particular, will go through them. They bring people in, they start to go through efforts, but it is very checkbox oriented. Okay, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, and we got payment for it, and we paid you for it, and the rest of it goes into our coffers, and now we go back to doing everything we did before, but we're better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And they have a certificate. There's usually a certificate.
And I think that is the thing that kind of troubles me about the funders getting involved in this work and doing it from either specific perspectives or with specific outcomes in mind, that some of this work isn't that kind of work. I think I worry too about who has access to those resources and how they're using them, or how they're being instructed and guided towards using them. And in this whole infrastructure that is completely inequitable, that is completely, designed to disadvantage, the fact that there is also not an underpinning of equity within the idea of trying to advance it. Like, they're not saying, hey, we're gonna, give you some support to navigate your way, and we're gonna ask that you honor values and bring in communities of color to have to help or to work or to offer the services they're already doing. Like, how are we uplifting, or how can we think about the way that we uplift communities of color and other marginalized communities in this moment and beyond? I think as we're navigating into what a new tomorrow might look like, and we're all thinking about how equity plays a factor in that, equity is bigger than a single indicator. And so even trying to think about the broader perspective of, who in the community is still being left out, who in the community is doing this work that you could learn from. And, wouldn't it be interesting if funders thought about it differently, instead of just saying, hey, PWI, here's a bunch of cash to do a race equity training so we can all say that you're better.
Right. And those poor people of color who are already in the organizations that have to be exposed to that race equity training that is designed specifically for the white people in their organization.
Right.
My God. At my university, they're starting to do these trainings like a lot of other universities. And I just straight up had to say, what you won't do is require me to go. Because I'm not having these conversations with people for whom this is brand new. Like, create a separate training for me. There is internalized capitalism and internalized anti-Blackness that I'm sure I am still working on it. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm not at that point, and I'm not sitting down for that training.
And we all are, right? I mean, yeah. I think about the same thing. I'm not Black, but I'm not white. And so going to these trainings, I feel like I don't know where I'm supposed to be. I have all kinds of feelings nobody wants to talk about. and that isn't discussed. That isn't addressed. These folks that are getting this funding, I don't want to say that I'm versed in all of the ways that different people are accessing money, but what I've seen and what I've heard is that that's not always taken into account when people are thinking through what are the equity or what are the anti-racist trainings that folks need access to, and how is that being tailored to that organization's moment in their journey and the community that they sit inside of.
That's an excellent perspective. And both of you just hit on some things that I don't think we could have scheduled this any better by mistake than we did. But did both of you read that little piece, not little at all, but that piece by Chris Rock in the New York Times recently?
No, I have not.
Yeah, I'll just excerpt a little blurb of this. He says, "It's real. It's not going away. I've said this before, but Obama becoming president, it's progress for white people. It's not progress for black people. It's a Jackie Robinson thing." And Brea, what you were talking about with how do the minority members of the institutions that you're going to go work with, when you mentioned that, that was the first time I've ever thought about these actual sessions that are being unfolded. Is yes, they're clearly being geared toward the Caucasians in the organization, but what kind of consideration and care has gone in? And even reading that short little thing from Chris Rock, I mean, that really drives home the point. You know, it takes a comedian to be able to, I think, package all of that up into such a nice little tidy, blurb to put out that really, sticks the landing, so to speak.
I think that mirrors what he was saying in one of his stand-ups where he goes, people always ask me, do you think things are better? And he's like, white people are a little nicer. Like, I'm still the same person that I've always been, but maybe you don't spit on me today.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and the shifts that we're dealing with, that there was a real moment, I think, when the administration transitioned, and I realized I wanted to believe that all of this wasn't still there. And
oh yeah,
right, ooh, I had a whole moment.
I was
a lot of people did. I'm not alone.
I was that SNL skit when they had, I think it was Chris Rock and somebody else watching the election, or maybe it was Dave Chappelle, and they were just like, yeah, no, I see this coming, I know this is going to happen, and all the white people in the room were like, how is this happening? And
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the great unblackening, and Larry Wilmore called it and then lost his show talking about the black perspective in, he was just like, the unblackening's coming, and then it was like, and your show's canceled.
You're done.
So I worry about that. I've been reading Diversity Inc., which is a really cool book that's been talking about the $1 million diversity industry, and who's really benefiting from this work. The private school that I went to, which was predominantly white in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, they're reckoning with some of this stuff right now. And they're having a invited talk with Robin DiAngelo, and somebody in my university was like, oh, maybe we should have Robin DiAngelo. And I was like, or you could get a person of color. Who's benefiting from a lot of this work, a lot of this money that's coming down the pike.
There was just an article that I was reading that was along the same lines of how, not to get on her, but how the whole industry has been monetized, and who has access, and who gets to say, and who gets to, once it gets so far down the road, it's so hard to even try to back engineer things anymore, right? And who will listen to who about what, but are they really listening, or are they just listening because they know you're another person like them that isn't really going to hold them accountable? So they'll sit real quiet and sit real happy, and then mark the box and keep moving.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about the people that have been doing this research and doing this work, and people that have been influential for me in my work. And it's a form of intellectual annihilation when their work is not cited. They are not called to come in and speak. But people like Robin DiAngelo and others get this sort of intellectual immortality because their name is going to continuously be out there, and they can continue to charge more and more at the expense of some of the people for whom the book is written about, right? Whose lived experiences contributed to the information that she now has. Not to say if you're doing that for your book club, by all means, rock out. There is some important.
You
got to start somewhere, friends. But especially when you're thinking about the opera world, a really good friend of mine, Antonio Kyler, just published a book, Insights from the Careers of Executive Opera Managers of Color. There were only 5 or 6. And he did a book-length manuscript interviewing these individuals and getting their experiences. So if you really want to think about how deep the issue goes in this particular field, there's a book ready for you.
that will get included in the resources, but that also just dovetails beautifully into another thing that happened in the New York Times a while back, where I'm sure you both probably know who Anthony Tomasini is, the classical music critic for the Times. And he wrote a piece back in July about how to better integrate diversity into the orchestra environment on stage, at least. And he went after the whole blind audition thing, which just, to me, it just pissed me off reading every single word of this. Because A, what you guys were just talking about, it's not anyone of color or any kind of minority that they actually got to write this article. They got Anthony. Anthony's a great writer, but he also couldn't have been more off on this whole point, talking about blind auditions, which, if you're not familiar with blind auditions, most orchestras put a screen up for at least the first few rounds before the finals so that the committee can't see who it is. And that actually isn't rooted necessarily in any sort of diversity effort, but it was to help prevent cronyism. But of course it had that minor byproduct to it. This is going somewhere good, fortunately. Is a couple of weeks after Tomasini's article, the Times published a follow-up, and it included a number of rejoinders from some people that I absolutely love. One of was Weston Sprott, who's been on the program already, and a colleague that I've known for years and years and years, Alex Lang, who's a clarinetist in the Phoenix Symphony. And the two of them and a few other people got together, and it was nice to see their perspective, because they were leaning very heavily into the fact that, yes, we are the people that you're saying you're trying to get into orchestras, and listen to us. We're the ones telling you what we think is important. Here are the things you need to actually focus on. And in a lot of cases, you don't even have to reinvent the wheel. Like Alex and Weston both cited the Rooney Rule from
Steelers, Pittsburgh. I don't like football, but I do like my hometown.
Sports ball. Yes. Yeah. But I mean, this is great. I've been a huge proponent for years and have gotten beat up over the idea that orchestras should have their onstage component reflect the diversity of their community. So if X percentage of your community is African American or Hispanic, then those seats need to be actively, aggressively filled by those same people. And what's always surprised me is the amount of pushback, not just from the administration side, but also from the musician side, which I've always been kind of surprised about. In your work, do both of you work with performing arts organizations very much, or are they other arts and culture type of groups?
I work a lot with performing arts organizations, since that's my home base as an artist. That tends to be a place where I feel really comfortable. I mean, I work with visual arts organizations too, but those are my people.
Have you encountered the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people, I think the most surprising, one day I'll have consulting outtakes and I'll just tell people all the things that people say to me. But one of the most surprising ones isn't that racist? I cannot figure out how they get there intellectually, but sometimes the idea of simply stating something like a Rooney Rule, or saying we have to bring in people of color that reflect the community, somehow in their mind it gets warped to being isn't that racist, or shouldn't we not be? I guess race is a taboo, and if we start from that foundational premise, then the idea of explicitly calling it out and asking certain people to come into the organization explicitly, I guess that's how they get there. I don't know. I've been grappling with that particular feedback for 10 years, trying to figure it out. But it's a form of bureaucratic racism. I mean, that's all it is. It's the implicit, we know who you want to have in the room. And just because you haven't explicitly said that, now you're figuring out all of these forms of modern bias to say, well, but aren't we still worried about excellence? That's always my favorite.
That's a good one.
Are we still worried about, are we still concerned about training and pedigree and, what about fit? Those are my three favorites.
Because they're still upholding, right? All of the things that underpin a Eurocentric canon, right? you can fight against it, you can push against it, and all of that will still come back. And the other thing I think too that kind of parallels to all of that is the idea that even if you break, that this isn't a one-time moment, right? All of this equity work that we're doing, even if we break it down, even if we right the ship in certain ways, the ship is predetermined and will continue to try to go back in that direction. So when people push, well, what about fit? Well, what about excellence? Well, what about, that is the system trying to propagate itself. It
Yeah.
is like a monster, like a beast that keeps trying to regenerate. And, it's fascinating because I think we don't quite have, we have, I think, the individualized things that we need to be thinking about and the things that we need to be breaking down. But I think we still struggle as a field with the systemic things that have to change, and with the foundational knowledge and the shared commitment. I think there's a lot of things that still underpin that continued challenges of trying to get this work to get traction.
And
And
people think it's solely individual level. I think that's
it's
where people fall
not.
flat. Like
It has to be
you can
operationalized.
have a system that wants to replicate and protect itself, and that means that you can have the most anti-racist staff and board and performers, but that system is still working to protect itself. So your best of intentions really don't mean much of anything.
That's beautiful, because listen to this from the statement from both Weston and Alex that they gave to the Times, because that phrasing it's almost like you were reading this along with me before. They said an anti-racist orchestra might define the work so that more qualities like artistic vision, interest in ongoing learning and development, and ability to authenticate, engage various audiences are valued in the hiring process. In short, an anti-racist orchestra would subscribe to paradigms that make hiring Black orchestral artists a normal and necessary part of pursuing its artistic goals. To me, that screams integration. It goes not necessarily against the system trying to protect itself, but a system will always try to protect itself. That's what all bureaucracies, even good ones, do, but you have to integrate that into the bureaucracy as well. And whenever you make large changes, you can wait 2 decades or not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of it, right? Like if you're going to make a change, you have to also think through what is the next and how do you sustain this change? What is the next step in this change? Because it isn't just making that one change. I think it's interesting too that you bring in the different definitions of excellence or quality, or one of the things that some colleagues of mine, Barbara Schaefer-Beacon and Pam Kors, have been working on through the Animating Democracy area within Americans for the Arts has been the aesthetic perspective, and it's been an intention to try to create space for people to think about aesthetics in the artistic perspectives of, maybe it's less about trying to define excellence, but how do you define the other things that art does? And how do you take that into account when you're thinking about evaluation, or you're thinking about, reviews, or, panel process and all of the different. And so I wonder too, if there's like a space within opera and orchestra to use that as a way to also kind of expand the way that they think about, expand the way that they look at, expand the way, and just disrupt what they've been doing. Sometimes even just a slight disruption can start the cycle of change. So, I want to put that forward too, that might be, something that folks can start exploring. And it doesn't come from, an anti-racist foundation. It doesn't come from some of these more, I think, kind of equity-based, which might make it a little more accessible for folks that are still kind of tentative about how they're going to activate this change. I think to Brea's earlier point about there's a lot of fear of making mistakes, of how to get started, of what the right thing to do is. But the honest truth is that right now, just do anything, something, try, or don't, and there'll be consequences eventually for that.
I'm a big fan when I
I'm kind of iffy.
I'm a big fan of consequences. When I first started doing equity consulting work, I was like, hearts and minds. I'm gonna get these hearts and
I'm
minds.
still there.
And yeah, I know, and I love you for it.
Yeah.
And you make sure that I don't turn into a cynical old crone. However, on the
It's because I'm
pathway
a
there,
bad old scorched earth campaigner. So I think we balance each other really well
yeah,
because I can watch you do it and then I can be like, oh, but Brea, there's so many other ways that we could.
nope. At this point, I am like, I don't care about your intent. What is your impact? And I need you to act right at work.
Need your
Like,
receipts.
it would be super cool if like your heart and mind is there too. But what I really need you to do is act right at work and
Just do
treat
the
people
right
like
thing.
human. Just be a
Yeah.
decent human being at work. Go home and
It
do
costs
whatever it is you
nothing.
want to do. But at work, you got to do the right thing. And here are the accountability mechanisms that are in place should you make the wrong choice. There's clearly a right choice and a wrong choice. There really isn't much gray area here. And once maybe a little bit, but once you
Just a little
understand,
bit.
but once you understand like the impact of all these
Then
things and
there's
how
no
they're interconnected,
excuses.
right? And that's,
Ignorance is bliss, and I'll let you live in that ignorance. But once you're aware, there's no pass.
I mean,
Then you're making a choice.
just to go back to like the hiring thing, you know, when people say that they want, well, we have preferred programs, we have feeder programs. Well, what you have is proxy language for how you can get somebody that's white from a certain socioeconomic status, right? Because you're counting on those schools to do some of your inequitable, dirty work for you, to filter out all of those
Filter
people
out.
before they can even have a chance to get in front of you. So, you know, let's be mindful of what you really mean whenever you're putting restrictions on these job descriptions. Let's be really mindful of what you mean whenever you're talking about performance review, both for your artistic staff and for your administrative staff.
Let's
And
just
yeah,
say that you should
go
have
out
that
of your
period.
right, go out of your way to recruit and retain people of color in your organization, but try to also not be that organization that does so much work focusing on the first rehearsal that it goes really well, and then you don't have any choreography or any music for your second rehearsal, meaning you've recruited that person in, but your organization is so crap that once they get in, they're leaving within a year, right? If I see continuous turnover at the 9-month year mark, then I have some questions.
Yes, many questions on that level. To that end, though, you know, talking about the systems that are in place, the one thing I've noticed when making real systemic change inside an organization is you no longer have to tell people to do the right thing. They self-police, or when they get a little over too much, they start to police each other. But that's a good byproduct of a problem to have in all of this. And it means that now you've actually crossed this threshold that is in the system and it is starting to perpetuate itself. Have either of you ever worked with an organization or watched organizations long enough to where you can put your finger on a group and say, yeah, I've seen that happen?
I've seen organizations that I think are at the beginning phases of that tipping point. And those organizations have understood, and this is the way that I approach sort of my equity work too, that it's organizational culture as well as equity stuff, because you can develop all these equity plans and equity strategic plans. But if you haven't really looked at what your organizational culture is and how it manifests itself, you can't graft that equity plan onto a not receptive organizational culture. So those organizations that I see that are like, okay, we have a very high achieving organizational culture. We have a club culture, and here's how that manifests itself. The ones that I see that are doing that tipping point or at that tipping point, they've recognized the ways that they can infuse equity work into their organization in a way that doesn't like prompt them to revert when the going gets tough. Organizations that have their first failure, I always try to warn organizations about their first failure because nobody ever tells them it's coming, and then it's like puberty and you just quit. So you're going to make a misstep. You're going to say the wrong thing. A board member is going to say something wild to a person of color and it's going to get publicized or whatever happens. What do you do after that? That's what everybody's looking at. And organizations that make it past that first failure are usually on the right track.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's so much, again, the fear. And when you are in a position where the organization is trying, or it has to be underpinned. Like I've been, I think, more in conversation with organizations that are either, getting out in front and doing a lot of great stuff. But if you peel it back just a little bit, you're like, friend, now there has to be, I think, we're in like the putting the meat on the bones kind of phase, where there's been a lot of skeletal work, a lot of infrastructure, let's get this plan, let's get this statement, let's get this thing. But now it's time to put the teeth, and it's time to add the muscle, and it's time to put the stuff and make the body, because without that, it just sits on the shelf. And, I've done different conversations with different organizations that are like feeling tentative, not quite sure, want the permission, acknowledge what the work is. They know what the work is, but is there any other way to do it besides having to really do the work? Right. And
can I just get the trophy? What's so hard about that?
Well, I know I have to do this, and I know I have to do that, and I know I need to do this. But aside from those three things, what should I do? I'm like, no. You have to go back, and that is the work. That is the stuff. And it's okay, because I think, kind of to Brea's point about when you make the mistake, it's the authenticity behind those efforts. If you make a mistake because you're just out there throwing stuff around, and you're not really being thoughtful, and you're not really being intentional, and your organization hasn't examined its values, hasn't examined even the trauma that it's already caused in a community, and how that is affected by continued behavior, or what your role is in healing your community. Like, there's so many facets to it that if you're not being thoughtful and intentional and mindful, and you're still trying to do this work, when you make that misstep, yes, people are going to come at you. But if you're being authentic, if you're being genuine, if you're really trying because you care, and you're communicating that, and you're showing that, I find that there's a lot more grace offered forward when the mistake happens. That it isn't, nobody's I think sometimes that like organizations think that like communities of color are just waiting to pounce. We're really not. We're waiting for you to change.
And let's be honest, if somebody is waiting to pounce, you've done some dirt.
You probably earned that one. I mean, but I think generally, right? Like generally, I don't think anybody's out there waiting to watch anybody fail.
They're waiting for you to do better.
We want you to do better, and we'll even support that if we believe that there's a genuine desire and a genuine commitment to doing better. And I think that's the examination, right?
Strategic amnesia that these organizations have, that's not gonna do it for you. That's not
gonna fly. Exactly.
You just touched on something that when I talk to boards especially, and executives with executive review, is trying to get executives to wrap their head around the idea that when you move into an organization, it really is your responsibility to pay for the sins of your predecessors, whether you deserve to, or you have any kind of ownership in it or not. And one thing was really interesting is, although the orchestra and opera field has had more than its fair share of Me Too issues and PR disasters that they've had to get up from under, there really have been very few diversity-oriented PR disasters. There was only one recently, and it was at Spokane Symphony, and actually I had the executive on an earlier podcast that will come out soon. And we didn't talk about this at all, though, which is a shame now looking back at it. But it was a situation where an employee got caught saying things on Twitter that were just no sort of thing. And so they took action, dismissed the employee because it wasn't the first time it had happened, and came out with the public statements. And then there was that kind of collective, okay, now what? Now what's going to happen? And they didn't really catch a lot of heat. There wasn't anyone to really pounce on them. But at the same time, there also wasn't anyone to say, hey, good for you for owning that.
And I think, from what I know of the symphony and orchestra world, so my 5 years playing violin when I was younger, it's a very small field, and your fates are tied to a lot of people a small number of people with a lot of power. So just because people aren't speaking up does not mean that there's no there. I know there have been many instances where I've been in an organization where I've been like, oh, this is wrong. This is hella wrong the way I'm being treated, but I've got to think about my next two steps. So maybe I can't say anything right now, but later when I have a position of power, I can at least maybe subversively help the person coming after me. Don't work under that person. That's not going to be your mentor. I can do some more of the like subversive mentorship that a lot of people of color in predominantly white organizations do. But maybe I don't have the authority and the space and the wherewithal to be out on Twitter calling people out.
I think that's such a rough,
and it's a shit place to be.
Such a rough place to be. And I always hurt for it. Like, I'm not that incendiary. I just am not that person. Like, it's really, it takes a lot to get me to the boiling point. So, watching situations that either, where perpetrators are allowed and enabled, and then all the damage that happens, and some of those apologies, okay, but the fact is that this shit happens still. Like, you can be sorry for it, but I still feel the way that I felt and still experienced what I experienced. And so I don't need the apology. I want to know what you're going to do different. I want to know what you're going to do better. And who is it that you're working with, or how is it that you're going to advance through that and improve to the other side? Whether it's board action, whether it's a plan, whether it's a whatever, I don't care. But I care more about what you're going to do after that than I care about the apology as it's coming, and the pain of what people have experienced to then have to collectively call something out makes it even, I think, just really painful to watch.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm working on right now is in my research is a thing called trauma entrapment, where organizations invite you to come in to share your trauma, but they put a lot of parameters, like restrictions on it. So it needs to be a dispassionate retelling of your pain that doesn't explicitly name anybody. And the reason why I call it trauma entrapment is because usually that information is used to figure out better and more subversive ways to hurt you in the future. Or the reaction from the people with power is so loud and obnoxious and theatrical, if you will, that it takes up all the air and all the emotional space. So you've invited somebody to share pain that you've inflicted, under the assumption that you're going to make the thing better, and then you completely botch the actual restorative remedy that you could very easily be offering in that moment. And a lot of organizations fall prey to that.
And regardless of intentions. And I don't know, I've been sitting here like scribbling things down like mad while we're chatting, because you're both putting out so many fabulous phrases. And some of them are just breaking my heart, though, too. Like, Brea, you used the term subversive mentorship. And it was normal. It was casual. It was, we're doing this. This is cool. Everyone knows about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've got a project called the Intellectual Black Book, that talks about, so it takes the idea of the Green Book, the Intellectual Green Book, the idea of keeping, people safe when they're traveling in unsafe spaces, and how that works as a mentorship structure for specifically women and non-binary individuals of color in the arts, because it's just the only way you can survive.
I'll just let that sit. People need to kind of let that soak in for a second. Yeah. Well, and these are the kind of sobering things that I do hope people have realizations on, regardless of which part of the stage they sit on, if they're on stage or back in the office or out in the audience as well, too, or writing the checks. You definitely can't just expect one single group of stakeholder, or even two, to carry this entire load. It has to be more than that. We've already been like chatting away for like close to 45 minutes. It just seems like we're just getting into it, and it's exciting stuff, though, too.
You can part two us at some point.
Well, I think I am going to leave it there. There are so many different directions I want to go, but I think we're going to part two this, and there are a few other podcasts that I've got ready to come out that dovetail with this from some other perspectives and other folks that it wasn't intended to be this way, but I've got several episodes that are kind of turning into a series organically, which is kind of nice.
Cool for you.
And I'm looking forward to seeing how this will just kind of unfold and try to get the timing right with how it's all played out and start to get reader feedback on this kind of stuff and encouraging it. So I think it's especially good to get perspectives from folks who are outside this field. I am all about the cross-pollination, and you need to get people who don't assume what you assume to challenge your assumptions, if nothing else. And so I think this has really been fantastic. Plus, you're both just wonderfully charming and delightful individuals. And this has been such a fun conversation.
I'm not from, my family's from the South, but I always go straight Southern. I'm always like, oh, well, thanks. Yeah.
I'm always like, yep.
Well, we will absolutely part two this. And I am going to go ahead and just leave it there unless either one of you have something you want to put in, like a nice little parting shot before we go.
I do want to share. Yeah, I was going to say, I do want to share, Americans for the Arts just launched a cultural equity resource center that is aggregating resources, e-learning opportunities, different news and research. Hopefully at some point, we're going to also be launching a directory for equity providers, equity training providers, because we get a lot of questions about that. But I think it would be great to be able to kind of centralize some of that information for the field. So if folks want to give us a visit, it's open to anyone in the field to peruse and participate. And that is at our website, americansforthearts.org.
And you're going to give the direct link to it, which I'll put in the resources, right?
I sure will.
Absolutely. If orchestras are interested in actually meaningfully engaging in this work, can they reach out to both of you to see about facilitating aforementioned work?
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. We usually try to customize experiences. So yeah, absolutely. If it's not the right fit for us, we definitely have a network of folks that we can make
know the people.
For. Yeah. We know the people. So yeah, absolutely. I would love if people would reach out, because I think normalizing the conversation and normalizing the outreach and the honesty is part of that work too. And it makes it easier for everybody to participate if we can just ask questions and not feel so alone in the work.
Yeah. And, I'll make sure that you have my email address, but brain barf emails are okay. I am an undergraduate professor. My professor brain clicks in and I can figure out what it is that you're asking, because sometimes people don't reach out because they're like, I don't have a fully formed idea or question or thought or ask. And it's like, we'll get there. It's fine.
Fabulous. So board chairs, executives, if you're out there, listening to this, hintity hint. And, contact these people.
Well, and maybe a sneak peek. We may be producing a classroom for the field that will be of interest to executives and board members. So.
Oh, you heard it here first. Yay.
I know, you really heard it here first, but
fabulous. Well, this will get out in a month and, we'll still see if it's new.
Yeah, no.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. I can't just give my thanks enough. This has been a fabulous conversation. I don't think I could smile anymore without my muscles hurting at this point. So,
Vaseline. From a dance team girl to you.
Well, and on that note, folks, thank you both for being here, and bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Oh, actually, turn off my phone. Follow my advice. Today's captivating guests are Brea M. Heidelberg.
Brea.
And try that again.
And our first guest is, one more time, Brea.
Brea.
The cheese. Our first guest, Dr. Brea M. Heidelberg, is an arts administrator. Now I got focused on that and forgot to look ahead. This is just tough out of the gate.
You can't keep making him laugh while he's trying to refocus, Ruby.
Oh, yes, she can.
I
will mute her, but it will be
contraire,
okay.
mon frere.
We are adulting, ma'am.
Says you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Oh, wow, she was like out.
Like, she really did.